Picture this. You're standing on a bustling dock, sun beating down, ancient city. Merchants are shouting, haggling over spices and silks. Ships laden with treasure, they're pulling into port. And the air, it just crackles with energy. This is Carthage, about 200 years before the birth of Christ, a real power player in the ancient world. But fast forward just a few years, in this vibrant city, it's gone. Reduced to smoldering ruins, its people scattered, its culture seemingly wiped out. Today, we're diving deep into the dramatic fall of Carthage.
It's one of those stories that we often hear from just one side, the Roman perspective. History is written by the victors, as they say. But to really grasp what happened, we need to go beyond that, explore Carthage on its own terms.
And luckily, we have some amazing sources to help us do just that. We'll be looking at the Roman historians, of course, Polybius, Appian, those guys. But we're also going to delve into the world of archaeology, get some expert insight from Dr. Eve McDonald. She's really a leading expert in Carthaginian archaeology.
Right, and it's that combination of history and archaeology that gives us a much richer picture. You can't rely on just one. We can see Carthage not just as Rome's enemy, but as a fascinating civilization in its own right.
So let's set the stage. It's 146 BC, decades after Carthage lost the Second Punic War to Rome. And just as a quick reminder, for anyone who needs it, the Punic Wars, these were massive clashes between Rome and Carthage. Centuries-long struggle for control of, well, pretty much the entire Western Mediterranean.
And even though Carthage lost that second war, they didn't just disappear, they actually bounced back. Big time. The years leading up to 146 BC saw some serious economic prosperity, rebuilding, growth.
So not exactly a crumbling city just waiting to be conquered then.
Not at all. The archaeology tells a very different story. We see big, elaborate harbors being built, evidence of massive trade networks. There are even accounts of Hannibal himself.
Wait, Hannibal? Like the Hannibal, elephants over the Alps, Hannibal.
The one and only. Apparently, he returned to Carthage after his defeat, even played a role in governing the city.
Wow, I had no idea. Always pictured him off somewhere plotting revenge. But if Carthage was doing so well, why would Rome feel the need to destroy them completely? Wouldn't a peaceful, prosperous Carthage be good for everybody? Good for trade? Good for stability in the region?
Well, that's where the story takes a turn. Not everyone in Rome thought Carthage was the threat. Some wanted to find a way to coexist peacefully, but there was another faction, led by Cato the Elder, a very, shall we say, determined senator.
Cato. Famous for ending every speech with Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed.
That's the one. Some historians say he was genuinely afraid of Carthage rising again. But others, they think his motives were a bit more complicated. Maybe a power grab, a bit of cultural rivalry. Who knows?
So we have a thriving city, a divided Roman Senate, and one very stubborn senator with a grudge. How do we get from all that to a full-blown war?
Well, it's often the case, isn't it? Lots of things happening at once. There were skirmishes between Carthage and their neighbors, the Numidians, who also happened to be allies of Rome. It gave the Romans an excuse, a casus belli, to get involved.
I doubt they just sent a letter of complaint. What did they demand from Carthage?
Oh, the demands were unbelievable. They wanted 300 Carthaginian children, the most prominent families, to be handed over as hostages. Can you imagine those families forced to send their children away to who knows what fate?
Just awful.
It gets worse. They then demanded Carthage completely disarm, leave themselves defenseless, and the final demand, the worst one, the Carthaginians had to abandon their city entirely, allow it to be burned to the ground.
I mean, what were they supposed to do? Give up their children, abandon their homes, their temples, their whole way of life?
It was an impossible choice, a decision that would determine their entire future. And in the face of it all, the Carthaginians showed incredible resilience. They refused to give in, and they chose to fight. And that decision to fight, oh boy, it led to one of the most brutal sieges in ancient history. 3 years. I mean, can you imagine what that must have been like? Trapped inside the city with the Roman army at your doorstep?
It's those human stories that get to me. We think about empires, about battles, but it's the individual lives, the courage, the sacrifice, the loss. What would it have been like to be inside Carthage, waiting, watching as the Romans closed in?
The Romans, they were masters of siege warfare, disciplined, organized, relentless. Just imagine the constant fear, running out of food and water, disease spreading everywhere. The Roman legions, they'd have cut off all the supply lines. No way in, no way out.
So the Carthaginians are trapped, outnumbered, facing an enemy that just doesn't quit. Do they have any hope, any chance at all of holding off this Roman war machine?
Despite all that, they were determined to survive. They fortified the walls, got their defenses ready, prepared for a long, hard fight. We're talking about the descendants of people who built a trading empire across the Mediterranean. Resourceful, tenacious. They were not going down without a fight.
It's like a classic underdog story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Little Carthage against the might of Rome. What kind of defenses did they even have?
Oh, Carthage was a tough nut to crack. It was on a peninsula with strong walls protecting the landward side. And the harbor, well defended. And remember all those tall buildings we talked about? Part of the city's defenses they were. Perfect spots for archers, lookouts.
Sounds like the Romans had a real challenge on their hands.
Oh, they did. The siege went on and on, 3 long years. Shows you how tough the Carthaginians were. We have accounts of fierce fighting, on land, at sea. Romans throwing everything they had at the city, trying to break through.
I can only imagine. Do any of the accounts tell us, about the tactics they used?
Yeah.
Both sides.
Oh, yeah. The Romans, they were all about siege towers. Huge things towering over the walls so their soldiers could attack from above. And battering rams, of course, to smash down the gates. Real feats of engineering, those ancient siege weapons.
Yeah, even if they were used for destruction.
True. And the Carthaginians, they weren't just sitting there. They had catapults, hurl rocks, fire bombs, anything they could get their hands on. Those siege towers even dug tunnels, trying to undermine the Roman siege work.
It sounds incredibly brutal. Both sides just pushing right to the limit.
Exactly. But eventually, it started to take its toll. The constant bombardment, the lack of supplies, the casualties, the defenders, they were getting worn down.
So how did the Romans finally break through? What was the turning point in all this?
Well, they focused on the harbor. That was Carthage's lifeline, right? Get control of the harbor, cut off supplies and reinforcements. That's the key.
Makes sense. But I bet the Carthaginians put up a heck of a fight.
Oh, yeah. The fiercest fighting was around those harbor walls. But after days of attacks, the Romans broke through. They got a foothold inside the city.
So the whole thing changes, doesn't it? Suddenly it's not armies clashing in open fields. It's a fight for survival in the streets. Almost claustrophobic.
You got it. The Romans, they had to adapt. Fighting in those narrow streets and alleyways, fierce resistance from the Carthaginians, soldiers and civilians, everyone fighting.
Chaotic.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking hand-to-hand combat, intense, bloody, and the city itself burning all around them, smoke, the screams of the wounded.
Just awful. And the civilians caught in the middle of it all.
There are accounts of families trapped in their homes, praying, hoping, while the fighting raged closer and closer. Some tried to escape, but so many were cut down by the Romans, or they died at sea trying to flee.
It's hard to even imagine. But even in all that horror, there must have been moments of, moments of courage.
Yeah. One story, it really stands out. Hasdrubal, the Carthaginian general, he retreated to the Acropolis as the Romans closed in. Bursa Hill, they called it.
The heart of the city.
Mm-hmm.
Literally and figuratively. Where the temples were, the important buildings.
Right, and that's where Hasdrubal made his last stand, along with what was left of the army and many of the citizens.
A last stand. Surrounded by the ruins of their city. What a tragic image.
The sources talk about incredible bravery, self-sacrifice, the Carthaginians defending their last bastion, but it was hopeless. Outnumbered, outmatched.
So what happened? Did they fight to the death, or did they try to surrender?
Well, Hasdrubal, he made a choice, a controversial one. As things got worse, he decided to surrender to the Romans, tried to save his own life, maybe get some mercy for the others.
I bet that was a hard decision to make. To surrender after fighting for so long, to watch your city fall.
It was, and it led to this incredible, tragic moment, a moment that really captures the essence of the fall of Carthage.
You were saying something about Hasdrubal's surrender leading to a tragic moment.
Yeah. His surrender, it didn't go over well with everyone, especially not with his wife. She was up on the roof of the temple, on Bursa Hill. Watching as Hasdrubal, he surrenders to the Romans, along with many of the survivors.
Oh, wow. I can't even imagine. After fighting so hard,
Yeah.
to see your own husband surrender to the enemy.
It was a moment of pure emotion. The Roman accounts, they say she saw it as a betrayal, an act of cowardice, abandoning their city, their gods, everything.
So what did she do?
Well, she basically denounced him right there from the rooftop for everyone to see, accused him of being a coward, abandoning his people, and then, well, she took her children and walked into the flames of the burning temple, chose death over surrender.
That's just heartbreaking. It really brings home the human cost of war, the individual tragedies that get lost in the bigger picture.
It does. And even though these accounts are Roman, so of course, there's a bias there, the emotion, the rawness of it, it goes beyond that, I think. Reminds us that history isn't just, dates and battles. It's about real people, real lives.
People who lived through these events,
Mm,
whose lives were shaped by them.
right. And, even though Carthage fell, the story doesn't end there.
Really, I thought the city was, like, utterly destroyed.
Huh.
Cursed by the Romans, just left to fade into oblivion.
That's what people think. But it's a bit more complicated than that. Yes, the city was sacked, burned,
Mm.
the survivors sold into slavery. The Romans, they even cursed the site. But Carthage had a way of bouncing back.
So what happened? Did people try to live there again?
Oh, yeah, there were attempts, but nothing really stuck. It wasn't until about a century later, Julius Caesar, he decided to revive Carthage.
Caesar always had a knack for the dramatic, didn't he?
He did. Caesar saw the potential, the strategic location. He founded a Roman colony there, reclaimed it, in a way.
It was a great spot for trade. The harbor, access to the Mediterranean. Did it work? Did Roman Carthage flourish?
It did. It became one of the most important cities in the Roman Empire, a center of trade, culture, administration, even became an important Christian center later on.
So from the ashes of destruction, a new Carthage rose. A blend of Roman and, well, Punic influences, I guess.
Yeah.
What about Carthaginian culture? Did any of it survive Roman rule?
That's a great question, and it's one that still fascinates historians and archaeologists. Roman culture was dominant, obviously, but there's evidence that the Punic language, some of the traditions, even religious practices, they carried on in different forms, of course. Some Punic gods, they were absorbed into the Roman pantheon, and some of the material culture, like pottery styles, you can still see the influence.
Culture is a resilient thing, isn't it? Even after conquest and all that.
It is. It's a reminder that it's not just about one culture completely wiping out another. It's more complicated, a mixing and merging.
So the fall of Carthage wasn't just about destruction. It was a turning point for Rome, for the Mediterranean, but it also led to something new, a new chapter in the story of that place.
That's right. And it leaves us with some questions, I think. What if Carthage had survived? How would history have unfolded differently? And what can we learn today from the destruction and then the rebirth of this amazing city?
Big questions. And they still matter, don't they? The story of Carthage. It reminds us that, well, that empires rise and fall. Cultures clash, they adapt. And even in the face of, what seems like the end, there's always the possibility of resilience, of renewal. If you'd like to learn more about ancient Carthage, Dr. Eve McDonald's work is a great place to start. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into history and, well, into everything else that sparks our curiosity. We'll see you next time.